My name is Boyd Pickard.
Hey, Boyd. And I'm Chris Budnick.
And this is a presentation entitled Narcotics Anonymous, A History of the Basic Text. It is not the history, it is a history. Nobody can tell the history because there are many things that happen and there are different perspectives, and this is just a history. I once looked up the definition of history, and it said an interpretation of events told in a chronological manner. So you're going to get we're going to tell you about events pretty much told in a chronological manner, but the key word in that definition is interpretation. Interpretation. And this is Chris's and I's interpretation of the events that happened, that unfolded, that led to the basic text, creation of the basic text for Narcotics Anonymous. And now we have right here, preserving the message. You guys can take out your phones and take a picture of this, because this is where you can find it actually on YouTube. It's called Preserving the Message. And we really want to thank everybody because we were up here in 2017, filmed this in September of 2017. We actually got it published up on the internet in April of 2018. And since then, as of last night, there were 4,253 views of that. So the message is getting out there. Want to introduce you to a man named William White. And William White is our mentor and our guide in this history journey that we do. We had the opportunity to start working with Mr. White in 2009, and we actually co-authored an article with him called Narcotics Anonymous, Its History and Culture. And if you'd like a PDF of that article, just Google it, Narcotics Anonymous, Its History and Its Culture. It's about a 30-page article. Or you can go to William White Papers, and it's on that website and can be downloaded. Now, Mr. White, or we call him Bill, Bill actually he learned his craft, if you will, through a man named Ernie Kurtz, Dr. Ernie Kurtz, who is a Harvard-trained historian. And Ernie wrote Not God, A History of AA, and it was published in 1979. And that book right there is pretty much the gold standard of any type of history investigation, if you will, within 12-step fellowships. So we're very grateful to Bill. And
So the sources, Boyd and I met in 2007, and we started doing research out of our interest in recovery. And so the source material for this presentation includes member archives. And in these member archives, you have the minutes from the World Literature Conferences. We have photos from the World Literature Conferences, tape recordings, and fellowship input. We also have newsletters from local Narcotics Anonymous fellowships that are source material for this presentation, member interviews, member talks, NA World Services, and there's two books that we relied on. One is called My Years with NA by Bob Stone, who was a non-addict manager of the World Service Office in the 80s, and The Story of the Basic Text, which was a recounting of the writing of the basic text by Bo S. So as we go through this presentation, there's a couple pieces of context that are important for thinking about how this book was written. And the first thing is that this was an unfunded project. There was not a budget. World Services was not providing funding to make this happen. So this really came from the self-funding of the members who were involved. The second thing that shapes the context of the writing of the basic text is the service structure is relatively new and it's still evolving. So there's a lot of changes going on with the world service structure. And another factor is that NA is growing outside of California at a pretty rapid rate, much more so than the first 25 years or so of Narcotics Anonymous. Lastly, there were very different forms of communication during the writing of the basic text. Newsletters, mail, and something called landline calls. In looking at this history, there's a couple questions that we thought were important to consider. And one of them is, how does literature impact the culture and growth of a fellowship? And secondly, we wonder, where would Narcotics Anonymous be today if the basic text had not been written?
So I'm going to talk to you for a minute, Chris and I are going to talk to you for a minute about the evolution of literature for addicts. And we're going to give you a little history of literature that is written by addicts for addicts. But first we're going to introduce you to Bobby B., who is a secretary of AA, a secretary at AA, and she worked in the General Service Office. And some of the first stuff that we find is a letter from a man named Clarence B. And Clarence was the secretary of an Addicts Anonymous group in Lexington, Kentucky. And Clarence writes the AA GSO and asks them if they have any literature for addicts. And Bobby writes back and she says that we're mailing you a small complimentary package of literature. We do not have anything written for the drug addict who is looking to Alcoholics Anonymous to help him maintain his recovery. But this is very important right here. But you can, in reading our material, substitute the word drugs for alcohol. So we start to see right here that when there are groups or a fellowship that is early in its maturity or early in its, they will borrow from a more established fellowship. And that's what we see happen for a while.
As we've interviewed individuals who are in recovery, particularly in Narcotics Anonymous, who got into recovery before there was a basic text, they often talk about this practice of being told to read AA literature and to substitute the word drugs for alcohol. So it was very interesting for us to discover this recommendation being made as far back as 1949.
So, from an AA pamphlet titled A Way of Life, Addicts Anonymous adapts that to our way of life. And there's the pamphlet right there.
And for context about Addicts Anonymous, it's the first 12-step fellowship for addicts, and it was formed in what was called the Narcotic Farm, which was a prison/hospital in Lexington, Kentucky. There was a second one that was in Fort Worth, Texas. But in 1947, in the Narcotic Farm in Lexington, this Addicts Anonymous group started with the outside support of an Alcoholics Anonymous member.
And so I'm going to read you just a little bit here of what it says in there. It says, the idea that someday they should do this or that, they will be able to control and enjoy their drug taking, is a great obsession with many addicts. Alcoholics Anonymous calls this thinking wet. Addicts Anonymous calls this needling ourselves. Whoa!
So this is, again, kind of adapting existing literature, but putting the addict experience and culture into it.
So then, by February of 1951, Danny C. in what we call the early New York NA publishes a little booklet entitled Our Way of Life, And it's basically an adaptation of the one that he came across at the U.S. Public Health Hospital.
We learned about a Narcotics Anonymous, an early New York version of Narcotics Anonymous in Montreal that started in 1954. And in the AA General Service Office archives where we did research, we found this woman, Lynn, had taken the AA Big Book, the chapter How It Works, and started to modify it to try to create literature for her Narcotics Anonymous group. And this is around 1955. And so it's interesting, you can see things like, prepared by the Montreal group of Narcotics Anonymous. Step one was originally written, we admitted we were powerless over drugs. She makes a change to that and says we admitted we were addicts. And then this is interesting too, because as she's writing about it, she's making comments about the material and how it works. And she talks about a concept that's familiar to the Narcotics Anonymous that exists today. And she says, it is our experience that once we have lost our tolerance for any given drug or chemical, we've usually lost our tolerance for them all. And so what she's conveying there is the concept of total abstinence, which is a central characteristic of Narcotics Anonymous today. Interestingly, the part of the AA chapter, how it works, it talks about the fourth step. She had some interesting comments. She said that this is where the change will go, and we know that a lot of addicts will struggle with this part of it, that they'll be afraid to do the fourth step. And when when she modifies the example from the big book, she makes some interesting changes. So if you're familiar with a big book, how it works, it has this column system of I'm resentful at, the cause, and effects. And so she says, I'm resentful at Mrs. Jones, told the police about my drug peddling activities. She's a nut, she snubbed me, she had her husband committed for using drugs, he's my friend and she's a gossip. So that's a very different interpretation of what's written in the AA, how it works. But it shows again that, drawing upon literature from an existing fellowship and trying to make modifications to it. Now, Narcotics Anonymous today started in 1953, and by 1954, they actually created the first piece of literature that wasn't an adaptation of an Alcoholics Anonymous pamphlet or book. And this is referred to as the Buff Book, and it was published in 1954. There were 3 people involved with the writing of it, a man named Jack P., a man named Cy M., and Jimmy K. And this is where Narcotics Anonymous makes a significant change to the wording of the first step and says, we admitted we were powerless over addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. And what's fascinating about this is that 95% of the members at that time were heroin addicts, and they made a decision that they wanted step 1 to not be about a substance, but to be about a condition. And that condition is addiction. And as a result, it opened up the door wide for any addict to walk into Narcotics Anonymous in the future. So this is, yeah. And there's a lot of very interesting information in this small pamphlet. It actually includes the Narcotics Anonymous reading just for today that some Narcotics Anonymous groups use, and that's actually the last thing in this Buff Book. So it's interesting that that's something that's survived all this time. After kind of a near-death experience in 1959, Jimmy K and some of the members that said we need to really adhere to the traditions, they created a new publication that was known as the Little White Book. We have conflicting dates on when it was published. One source says 1961, another says 1962. But this becomes the first piece of Narcotics Anonymous literature that contains the 12 traditions. And when we ask that question of how does literature impact a fellowship, we saw in our research that Jimmy really was insistent in making the traditions visible and present. He put them into the chairperson's reading for the Friday night meeting. They wrote it into this pamphlet, making it something that people read and started becoming a part of the culture and so forth. The evolution of the Little White Book is that in 1966, it was revised to include 6 personal stories. And there's still kind of an evolution to the language and terminology. So we have one woman's story, and she says, I'm an addict and alcoholic. It was never very hard for me to say I was an addict, but it was really hard for me to say I was an alcoholic.
So yeah, a little bit different language, I understand, in meetings today. So, the very first letter here, okay. So we know that in 1972 there was an effort to create, I'll just go ahead and say, the NA Big Book, all right? Because a letter, we have a draft copy here that Greg P. wrote, went out to the fellowship. The Board of Trustees authorized this, but it's our understanding that not a whole lot of input came back. Here it is right here. All right, so here we have, in 1972, Northern California had a desire for more NA literature. All Narcotics Anonymous had at that time was the little white book. And so Northern California wanted more, and they wrote this pamphlet called This Is NA. It's a little booklet, and it's a direct, and I do mean direct, plagiarism of an AA pamphlet titled This Is AA. So now in 1976, when they had 6 pamphlets were put on the tables, they voted on it and they put it on the tables. They also put this pamphlet right here, which is we made a decision, which it says on there is a direct reprint from the booklet This Is NA. What's really funny is the Board of Trustees never approved the little booklet This Is NA. I'm going to give you a little showing of what's in the booklet, or excuse me, in the pamphlet.
And so again, we made a decision, was originally a section of This Is AA. It becomes part of This Is NA. So essentially you have something directly from an AA pamphlet being made as one of the first 6 informational pamphlets. And in AA's version, it says, quite naturally, the prospect of a life without alcohol seemed a dreary one. We feared that our new friends in AA would be dull, or worse yet, wild-eyed evangelists. NA's version says, quite naturally, the prospect of a life without drugs seemed distasteful and dull. We feared that our new friends in NA would either be square, or worse yet, be fanatics.
So in 1976, Narcotics Anonymous publishes 6 pamphlets to go on the table. Who, what, how, and why? The group, So You Love an Addict, We Made a Decision, Another Look, and Recovery and Relapse. And 4 of those pamphlets are still approved literature.
In our research, we can't tell if So You Love an Addict is an inspirational pamphlet or a warning.
Boom.
The reservation that, well, maybe I can blow a little weed, every second Tuesday of the month. Nobody be any wiser. It won't hurt me. Or I can take a few pills now and again when I'm down the beach or when I go visit my aunt somewheres. I get away with it when we know we can't. But the big AA book brings out the same idea, and we laugh at it, about the jaywalker. And it's exactly the same way of thinking. The jaywalker who would continually run out in the street in front of cars, in front of fire engines, in front of trolley cars, just for the thrill of beating them. Eventually one day he got hit, landed in the hospital. For a couple of days he gets out and he does the same thing again. You say, this guy is nuts. And yet this is exactly what we do. We keep doing it again when we know we can't win.
So does anybody know who that is in the audio? Okay, so that's Jimmy K. And what's interesting about this is a Narcotics Anonymous meeting in the early 60s. And it's very different to hear in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting references to AA literature. As Jimmy's doing in this situation, he's talking about an example in the big book about the jaywalker and using it to kind of draw his own experience as it relates to Narcotics Anonymous. And so that's one of the ways that we think about how literature can impact the culture of a fellowship when you don't have a primary textbook for that fellowship. Jimmy came out of AA. He found Recovering AA in February of 1950. And we've had a lot of unique experiences in our research. And one of those experiences was being able to see his first edition Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book. And we're able to share some pictures with you from that. There was a strong family involvement, and in his big book he has a note written to him by his father. We see an early member named Gene H., who passed away July 10th, 2015 with 53 years of recovery, had signed Jimmy's AA Big Book. Early members Penny K. and Bob B., early NA members, signed his Big Book. His brother, who was a member of AA, had signed his Big Book. And interestingly, the co-founder of Al-Anon, Lois Wilson, had signed his Big Book.
Yeah. Deserves a clap. Okay, so the spark that actually led to the creation of the basic text, and we're going to listen to Bo tell you a little bit about it.
Well, he had the World Convention planned in San Francisco. So I made a deal with this other guy, Tommy B., that he would go out there, and if he couldn't go, I would go. But one of us would go out there. And wound up, we both went. So we got to San Francisco, and you are getting to know me a little bit tonight. Can you imagine, let's see, I was 29 or 30 when I got clean. So I was probably like 33 years old, so it'd be a much younger version of me walking around trying to look nonchalant, asking who's working on the book. You know, I would say, like, it's nice weather out here, I like this convention, who's working on the book? I mean, I was about as subtle as a brickbat. And they kept like, go over here, go over here, go over here, go over here. And I kept going wherever I was told. And within about 3 or 4 interactions like that, I wound up at registration, where I met about half of the people in World Services in 15 minutes. Jimmy Cake, Chuck Skinner, bunches of them, Sally, Jack Whaley, Bob Barrett, and Greg Pierce. And so Jimmy says, hey, Greg, this guy's from Atlanta, and he's asking about who's working on the book. And so they sent me off with Greg. They pawned me off on Greg. And so we hit it off. I mean, he had read a lot of science fiction, and I was science fiction. So I said, like, well, what's the score with the book and all? And he says, well, nobody will work on it. And I said, is that right? Why not? And the saying was that addicts in recovery can't write. So I said, so does that mean they've tried and failed, or that they haven't tried? He said, well, mostly they haven't tried. And I said, well, who can run on this stuff? He said, well, any member. I said, well, I'm a member.
All right, now go ahead.
And, you know, emblematically in that little conversation, you know, I was thinking about all the dead people and the horrible way we die. And, you know, writing's not really that goddamn hard. And so anyway, with his from the top more or less clearance, I started writing some stuff when I went home. I mean, he took me down to some oldest meetings in the world, you know, in California and Hollywood and all that next week. But mainly, I felt like I had permission, you know. And I felt like if I did something, that I could get other people to do stuff.
There's about There's about 3 or 4 really kind of important things that come out of that clip. One is a question of when would have a book for Narcotics Anonymous been written if Bo had not made that trip out to San Francisco. And again, the benchmark that we use is 1972. A letter goes out to the fellowship, interest in a book, nothing's happened. It's 5 years later. And this was not something that was happening in California with World Services or anything like that, saying, hey, let's get going on a book. It's a member from Atlanta who goes out there and starts saying, hey, what's going on? Do we have a book? Is there plans? And so forth. And that initiative is really kind of an important part of this story of how the basic text was written for Narcotics Anonymous. The second thing is what do you hear motivating Bo?
People are
Yeah, you hear him saying their addicts are dying. And so he's motivated and driven by that. The third thing that kind of comes to us from this clip is just differences between 1977 and 2019. What was the theme of the convention? Now we're thousands. And Narcotics Anonymous conventions today often have clean time countdowns. This had a sobriety roll call. And the entertainment was, did anybody catch that? Arm & Hammer Disco. And as Boyd and I have done this research, we've come to recognize that in telling history, sometimes we have to broaden the scope and the focus beyond just Narcotics Anonymous. For the younger individuals sitting in here, the entertainment looked something like this.
So allow me to introduce you to a man named Greg P. Greg was a member of the Board of Trustees of Narcotics Anonymous. He, along with Jimmy Kay, wrote the NA Tree, which was NA's first service structure. He also wrote the IP number 9, Living the Program. He wrote number 12, The Triangle of Self-Obsession. And his story is in the basic text titled, I Was Different. Sadly, Greg passed away in April of 1999 with 28 years clean. We're going to listen to Greg talk about the beginnings of the book.
I think the actual process started, at least for this attempt, but actively started in San Francisco. I mean, the things that led up to that, the writing letters, the looking to people, the encouraging people, the phone calls and everything else, those were all setting the stage. I really believe the actual process started in San Francisco in 1977 at the 7th World Convention. And it grew from there. I want to read a letter that I think is real indicative that Bo sent me in December of 1977. And I think this letter really speaks to some of the spirit of the basic text, of the process. Dear Greg, guess who bought a typewriter? I hope you have a nice Christmas. This is December 16th, 1977. Please say hi to Lois and the baby. Hope to see you next year. I've gotten off to a rolling start with the writing. I've started umpteen pamphlets and worked on a few notes for the NA book. My friends here know of my efforts, and I hope to get a few of them together soon for input and discussion. Hopefully this will take place here and elsewhere. Thank God it's begun. At this point, I feel we have to involve as many people as many as possible, and make sure we cover make sure we cover all points of view. Involving people might struggle the effort and controversy, but I really trust the spirit and believe that we'd be poor servants to leave them out. Somehow, if we could get our best minds working on this in harmony, I just know it would strengthen the gut of the program. In my thinking, it has occurred to me what we're up against, like, is NA a cure for addiction? How to help doctors learn to treat or react to addiction. I would hate to see any valid point of view left out. Also, I would hate to see any great length of time elapse without some progress. Please write to me, my friend, your friend Bo.
So you can tell that Bo's thinking a lot about the NA basic text, but he's painting a broad scope, a broad picture right now with it. He hasn't gotten homed in on a real fine point, because he talks about, what are we up against? How do we help doctors? But he does bring a very valid point that is a core principle actually through this whole process is that we would be poor servants if we didn't include everybody. We may be stifled by time by a little bit, but we need to include everybody. Now, there's a little side story to this letter right here. I went down to Atlanta and picked Bo up and picked 20 boxes of Bo's archives up many years ago, and we went to my house, and Bo allowed Chris and I to actually digitize these archives. So it took a while to get them back to Bo, and I got most of the boxes back, but I had about 3 boxes left. And then Bo had a fire in his house, probably, I'm going to ballpark it at about 3 years ago. And all his archives burnt up, all his valuable archives. Fortunately, Chris and I had digitized everything that we thought was of high value, and we had also digitized the tapes that he had, because he also had tapes of the first 3 World Literature Conferences. Now, through my negative procrastination, I happily actually discovered that I had that letter. I still had that letter. So this is a case where a negative trait of procrastination actually turned into a positive value. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
But it's also an opportunity to remind folks that, home groups have important histories, and whatever archives your home group, whatever archives you may have, these are important things that should be digitized and preserved so that they're available for other people to learn from. I think what's interesting for Boyd and I, why we are become students of the history of recovery, is to never forget the people that helped do the work to make recovery possible for the person today. And so that's why this type of history and telling and preserving this type of story is really important to both of us. Now, he references something in the letter in the very beginning. He said, "Guess who bought a typewriter?" So I want to provide a picture, and I want to ask who's actually used a typewriter. Okay. It's not to make anyone feel excluded who hasn't used a typewriter, but there is certainly a delineation in the room.
So, in January of '79, Jimmy and Greg encouraged Bo to write a letter to the fellowship asking for input. Now, Bo relayed the story to me that he was kind of uncomfortable with that because he was not a world-level elected, trusted servant. And he said, "I just don't feel like it's my place to do this." So he told me that he got a call from Jimmy Kay, and Jimmy says, "Oh yeah, you're on the World Service Office Literature Committee." And Bo said he was thinking to himself, when did I get elected to that, But anyway, Bo does it, and he puts a letter out to the fellowship, and he says, "We realize that some will be skeptical about this effort, but we're really not doing this for selfish reasons. People who could be helped are dying every day of our disease." And that's a theme you'll see over and over. It says, "A few of us can't do it alone. We need your help. Please send your stories and input." And this is the only time you will ever see the World Service Office Literature Committee in Marietta, Georgia. So, in April of 1979, Bo actually gets elected to the chairperson of the World Literature Committee. Now, please, here's some context for you. There's only been one other World Literature chair, and they didn't do anything outside of California. All they did was try to rewrite the Little White Book and some of the pamphlets. And so, this is where things start taking shape, is right here. And in talking with Bo, I was very interested in whether or not, Greg and Jimmy had kind of set this up. And he told me no. He said that it was really a surprise to him when he went out to the conference and he actually got elected. So letters start going out to the fellowship. One of the places that the letters went to was this publication called The Main Line, which is out of San Francisco, and it was a newsletter. And we're going to now have our first chance of audience participation, if you guys would. We need somebody to come up and read something for us Do we have any volunteers? Yeah, there we go. Now I've got to find a microphone that works. Let's see if this one does. Check that one. See if that works.
Addict named Scott.
That's good.
Main line. We now have literature committees in Venice, California, San Fernando Valley, California, Wichita, Kansas, Scranton, Pennsylvania, Atlanta, Georgia, and prospective committees in Minneapolis and Miami. The Literature Committee in San Fernando Valley is working on collecting material on where our literature has come from in the past. The chairperson of the committee is a volunteer worker at the WSO. They have already copied our mailouts to make them available to ASC members. Trusted servants like this are making the dream of new NA literature come true.
All right, thank you, man. Very
Thanks,
much so.
Scott.
Let's give him a hand.
Just a side note, one of the things, we've done this presentation a number of times, and one day I was actually looking at what we weren't reading, and in the corner it says, Narcotics Anonymous has no big shots, no little shots, one shot, and we're all shot.
Okay, we've got actually audience participation number 2. Would somebody else come up and like to read for us, please?
Right there.
Okay, right there, Philip. It's just the highlighted parts, please.
Okay. I'm an addict seeking recovery. My name is Philip W.
Hey, Philip.
We all need to attend the Witcher Conference.
Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah, that's one. For narcotic, for NA literature, October the 6th and 7th. We'll be here soon. The next one is, I discovered that God wants our book. God, as I understand him, is hungry for NA literature. Been waiting for years. What's been lacking is the development of a part of our service structure devoted to literature. The last piece, we don't need hundreds of members trying to get contributions. We don't need hundreds of members trying to get others to write. We need hundreds of writings. Our experience of affiliate affirmation and joy in committing our feelings and thoughts should be shared.
All right. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, man.
This line, again, kind of reflects this concept. We don't need hundreds of members trying to get others to write. We need hundreds writing. So the basic text was written over the course of 7 literature conferences that occurred between October 1979 and January 1982. In our research of going through the minutes, there are 412 addicts who are listed in the minutes that came from 25 states and one from Canada. But there's countless other unknown addicts who contributed through their local literature committees, through individual submissions, or who participated in a literature conference but didn't want their name included in the minutes. So this is kind of how the book was put together. And we'll start off by talking about the First World Lit Conference, but I'll add that there's a lot of stories that are still out there to be collected. And one of the things that we've been intentionally trying to solicit is stories from women who are involved, to have more women's voices in this. So when we say this is a history, part of why it's only a history is because there's so many other folks who have information that could contribute to this based on their experience. But here's the First World Lit Conference, the flyer for it. It's a 2-day conference in Wichita. The theme of it is You Are the Book. And it says, I would like to stay at an NA member's home. Why do you think it indicates that on the registration? So,
Exactly,
yeah,
no
so
funding.
This is an unfunded project, and most of the folks that are attending don't have the finances or resources to make this type of trip. So there were 25 addicts who registered, 34 ended up attending. They came from 6 different states, California, Georgia, Kansas, Nebraska, Tennessee, and Virginia. And in this clip, you'll hear a gentleman named Joseph P. Talk about going to Wichita.
And I was told about the first World Literature Conference that was coming up a few months later up in Kansas. And so I'd arranged for the Bo to come through Memphis and pick me up and go up there. I didn't know what it was going to be about. And on the way, talked about a lot of things, and we talked about we were going to write this wee book. And they kept talking about for days this wee book we're going to write. And all this information that Greg had and other people had was getting piles, and the copy machine was running. And I couldn't figure out how they were going to get all this material in a small book. And it went on and on and on. And what I finally figured out after that convention is the wee book is that we together and not small. But I never asked. So that's where I was.
So we've mentioned this already. We're playing a clip of Joseph talking about it. This idea of inclusion, the importance of that for individuals with addiction who have been at the fringes of society frequently and been excluded and not able to participate. So this strategy, this philosophy, this core value of inclusion is really throughout this whole process. And so out of this first World Lit Conference came the Handbook for Narcotics Anonymous Literature Committees that could serve as a guide and a template for local NA fellowships who wanted to form a literature committee and start writing literature. And this core value of inclusion comes right from the very beginning. And it's based on the idea that input was encouraged, actively sought, and highly valued from all members of the fellowship, regardless of how long they'd been clean or what their experience was. And this is contained in many places in the handbook. On page 1, every member is welcome to contribute material to this effort. We need all types of stories, and yours might be just the one to help your type of addict. We ask all members to send in their material without worrying too much if it is any good or not. Some of the best is probably in trash cans right now. So there's that kind of language and that empathy, conveyed in there. Core value, again, is emphasized, saying, in a real sense, ours is a movement of the message from those who have it to those who are dying for it. What do you think the handbook says about profanity? So it discourages it, and it showed a lot of forethought. It emphasized the need to eliminate profanity from literature. Stories can include slang but not profanity, since this would limit the availability of our book in some areas and institutions. So a lot of forethought, recognizing that a warden or a hospital administrator, if they had a book that had profanity in it, might say, well, I'm not going to have this type of book in my institution or in my facility. And if that was the case, there would have been a lot of addicts that wouldn't have access to this message. The only place that we see profanity is in input that was submitted. So input would come in sometimes just handwritten on half sheets of paper, and it says the word F should not be used. And it's just kind of interesting to see that people are actually writing that type of input into the literature committee. At the end of the handbook, it talks about some suggested topics that literature committees could write on, and Boyd's going to read off 3 that have stood out to us.
Yeah, we thought these were interesting as topics. Anyway, it's one of them is beer and grass was no excuse. Next one was little old ladies can get sick too. And the very next one, Chris and I scratched our heads at, and we had to go ask some NA members, what was 13th stepping?
This presentation has continued to evolve as people have reached out to us and provided information. So just a couple of years ago, an early member who we'll introduce in a little bit said, hey, I found a picture from the First World Lit Conference. And so this is members of Narcotics Anonymous who were of service that weekend to help in the effort that resulted in the writing of the basic text.
So, the Second World Literature Conference held in Lincoln, Nebraska. And it's actually, if you noticed here, it's September the 8th through 11th, and it's 11 months. 11 months has passed since the first one was held. And you see here the theme of it. It says, "Come help us write the big book," which is really pretty interesting. There were 36 members from 8 states and 1 province in Canada that showed up. There were 7 members that had attended Wichita that went to Lincoln, and that's really very important because you get continuity there. But what's the most important thing that happened, in my opinion, at this particular conference is a man named Bob B. and Greg P. showed up, because those guys were from the West Coast, and both were members of the Board of Trustees and very much advocates of getting this book written. And the way I understand it is the West Coast, or specifically in the LA area, they were a little bit not quite sure what these guys over here on the East Coast were doing. And so by Bob and Greg, coming to the conference, that lended validity to this particular movement. Huge thing. Bob B., member of the Board of Trustees. Chris and I had a chance to meet him one time, and he just is a very humble man. His story's in the basic text titled, "I Found the Only NA Meeting in the World." Sadly, he passed away in June of 2015 with over 53 years of recovery. Let's have a hand.
He also has a story in the White Book called Something Meaningful.
We once asked him why the different stories in the different books. He just said, different times, different person. So the second most important decision, in my humble opinion, is that Greg suggested using the chapters from the Little White Book as the outline for the NA Big Book. And we learned that by listening to the tapes. We also know that at that time they voted that in, but they also voted to have 2 more chapters. One of them is Just for Today, Living the Program, and another one is More Will Be Revealed. And by listening to these tapes, we found out that Greg had envisioned that chapter as being kind of a version of AA's A Vision for You. Interesting. So I'm going to introduce you to a man named Jim N. now, and this is entitled Memories That Needed to Be Preserved. So Jim's got a story that just blows us away. But he got clean in November of 71. He passed away in December 2013, shortly after his 42nd anniversary. And we're going to listen to Jim tell you how they solicited money.
Well, my neighbor offered me a ream of paper and the use of his copy machine, so that wasn't the problem. The problem was postage. So there were 5 of us sitting around the kitchen table at my place one day, and I made the comment, well, I guess I've sold plasma to support my aunt. We can probably make a trip to the plasma center and get a pint of blood is $15 and a roll of stamps is $15. And so the guys all went down the blood bank and sold blood. And we went back to the house and laughing and joking, and each of us had a roll of stamps in our pocket, and we addressed flyers and sent them to every address that I could get my hands on.
Isn't that pretty cool? Yeah. Go ahead.
So as we've listened to these stories of how the basic text was written, we saw a subtitle of this presentation as being Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and that's kind of the blood part. We talked with some NA members one time and said, it seems like it would be a neat way for you guys to honor Jim by selling plasma and using the money to buy basic texts. And somebody said, great idea, most of us have hepatitis, so. But anyways, I mean, it speaks to the desire to get people there. And they had the flyers. They just didn't have a way to mail them, and really wanted to make sure that people could get there.
Because again, it's an unfunded project.
Yeah.
They had to do it themselves. We're going to listen to a man named George R. tell you a little bit further about how he got there. And George he got clean in actually February of '77, and his story is It Won't Get Any Worse, which appears in the 2nd through the 5th editions of the basic text.
Bo kept telling me to go to the World Convention and then the Second World Literature Conference in Lincoln, Nebraska. The 10th World Convention was in Wichita, Kansas. We were broke. I mean, we had no money. I was 20 years old. And I actually, to go to that, I sold my washer and dryer, and I bought a train ticket because I couldn't afford to fly. And it took me a day and a half to get out there on a train. Now, when I got there, I had $70 for the 4 days at the convention, the 7 days at the literature conference, and the day and a half train ride there and the day and a half ride back. I think I was broke before we got to the literature conference. I didn't have a place to stay. And this became an MO for the literature conferences. Just come. We'll figure all that stuff out when you get there, you know.
Between the First World Lit Conference and the Second World Lit Conference, 800 pages of material had been collected through individual members writing from literature committees. And they had to figure out, how do we make sense of this input? And this is one of, quite honestly, the most fascinating things about how the basic text was written. It had so many authors, and the information was really assembled in a very unique way, which I'm not aware of any other book being written this way. And so we're going to listen to how this material was sorted, and it's going to come from an individual whose name is Motorcycle Ed.
I believe at the second one that I showed up at, the real treat for me was get to do what all the other people had got to do in kindergarten that I didn't get to do because I didn't get to go to kindergarten, was little itty-bitty scissors and cut up pieces of paper and take the paste stick and put it on the back and paste it on another piece of paper. And the kid in me, of course I didn't know what to call it at that time, just went berserk. You know, hot diggity doggy dum. And
So it would be like saying something here, like, everybody go write a page on why this retreat is so important to you, and then coming back and in small group reading through and saying, here's a great sentence, or here's a great line, and trying to assemble something that could be published based on all that input. And so very time-consuming process, and we're going to hear Charles Kay talk a little bit about it as well. And when they talk about cut and paste, again, for our newer friends and younger friends, that's not like Control X, Control V on the keyboard. That's, as Ed was saying, scissors and glue. Charles attended 3 of the World Lit Conferences, and his story appears in the 1st through the 5th edition of the basic text, and it's titled An Indian Without a Tribe.
Hi, everybody. I'm Charles Kay, and I'm an addict. Some of the things you might not, that they touched on a little bit, like the cut and paste, that's how the whole book was put together. People cutting single lines out, pasting them on paper, photocopying it, passing it out to like everybody here. You would read it and go, no, I don't like that. We want to change that. So you cut that out, you paste it again, you re-photocopy it, and you kept doing that till you got to something you liked in your workshop. Then it went to the main group, and the literature committee was doing consensus before consensus was popular. That's how every line of the book was approved by consensus.
I'm sitting here thinking about the little cartoon we showed before of the alcoholic stepping on the rake. That's kind of like a simple way, in the addict taking the rake, running, jumping, twisting, spinning, you know. That's kind of the equivalent of how this was put together. A lot of involvement, a lot of steps to it. And, but again, that's one of the things that made it so unique, was it had the fingerprints of like the entire fellowship on the process.
So the literature of prayer, we're going to let George tell you a little bit about it.
And this provides some context for what gave guidance and inspiration, and also was a framework for how all the groups, whether working in small groups or larger groups, work together.
I have basic text on my phone, and what I read is, what's it known as now, the service prayer. To me, it's still known as the literature prayer, because that's where it comes from. It talks about, help us write, before every conference meeting, every conference workshop, at our home workshops at, our own literature in Bucks County and in Philadelphia, before we started, we would read that prayer. And when that prayer was read, it was almost like, I'm getting goosebumps now. Like the fog would roll in, and you could just feel everyone would release their control and, and kind of let God's will take over, because we were there for a purpose.
Now we're going to listen to Charles continue telling you about it.
The cool thing was, you always prayed. We always said that prayer, and you could feel God. He just touched us. And you knew you were doing something really great. But it wasn't you. You were just a vehicle to let this thing happen.
Pretty powerful. So this is the literature prayer, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, God, grant us knowledge that we may write according to your divine precepts. Instill in us a sense of your purpose. Make us servants of your will, and grant us a bond of selflessness, that this may truly be your work, not ours, in order that no addict anywhere need die from the horrors of addiction. Pretty cool. Okay, we've got in the Rainbow Connection here, which is a news booklet or letter that was printed out of Atlanta, Georgia. We found some pretty cool history of the second World Lit Conference, and it was printed right after the second was over with. In this first page right here, it says the Second World Literature Conference of NA added at least 1,000 more man hours to the effort of a basic text for our fellowship. And it goes on to say, as a result of addicts meeting in Lincoln, Nebraska in September 1980, a book, a dream, will be realized. But it would be inaccurate to say that we have written a book. We all came from many parts of the country and many walks of life. We all had, by the grace of our higher power and the help of our fellow addicts, survived a killing disease. In an effort to continue to survive, we have met here to share our experience, strength, and hope. The book is just a reflection of this effort. It is in this spirit that our book will come forth. Addicts all over the world will have the Narcotics Anonymous book for comfort and for study. When we find ourselves by ourselves, we need not be alone. We will have our book, and we will have each other.
So this was in September 1980, and by the end of January 81, they're holding the Third World Lit Conference, and we'll listen to Joseph talk about how they selected Memphis for the location of the World Lit Conference.
I'm an addict from Memphis. My name's Joseph. Hi, Joseph. They were going to set up a time to have the next one. And, of course, me being the assertive, good controlling addict that I was, I wanted to volunteer Memphis. And so I did. And, of course, I was the only clean member in Memphis. But things worked out, and we had that literature conference that the Gray Book came out of.
So I'd like to point out something about Memphis, and it happened, things are starting to speed up now. We had 11 months between the first and the second, but now we've only had like 4 months and 3 weeks. And so I think they're starting to realize that if they don't start speeding things up, this book's not necessarily going to happen. This particular conference is actually the longest one to date. It's actually 9 days. And I also want to point out something else. This is where Narcotics Anonymous started developing their fellowship-specific language. Because you'll notice right here that it says, with gratitude in our cleanliness. So it's still in the process of development. It's not necessarily been finalized, but as you'll see, this particular conference right here starts the ball rolling in that area.
There's registration that's $12, and interestingly, Naranon is an option that you could select, so you see other people coming who are supporting members who are participating. 73 people attended, coming from 14 different states. And listening to George R. and his talks about the writing of the basic text contain a lot of really wonderful information. And he recounts in one of his history talks who they realized they were writing for when they were in Memphis.
At the Memphis conference, we talked about how this was going to change Narcotics Anonymous, and the purpose of us writing it was for addicts seeking recovery today, addicts that haven't used yet, and addicts that haven't even been born yet. We knew this was long term, and for me today, sometimes I get asked to speak, and I got introduced as, he's been around so long, he's been clean longer than I've been born. Before I was born, actually before my parents even met yet.
This is minutes from the first day of the third Lit Conference, and it says, goals for the conference are to complete the final draft of the Narcotics Anonymous Big Book, so that language is still being used, and to submit literature to the World Service Conference 2 months prior to May 1st. So there was a real heavy and intense effort to get this draft completed and out in time for it to be reviewed and considered at the World Service Conference. We see that Bo had been in touch with the AA General Service Office, and this letter to him a few days before the conference came back from AA General Service staff wishing them success on the book and a successful conference in Memphis. Work had continued between conferences, and Chapter 1, Who's an Addict, was worked on by the Atlanta Literature Committee. Greg P. wrote the Chapter 6, which was his interpretation of the 12 traditions. Chapter 7, Recovery and Relapse, was submitted by San Francisco. We Do Recover, Chapter 8, was submitted by the Bristol, Pennsylvania Literature Committee. And the Philadelphia Literature Committee submitted a draft of Chapter 10, More Will Be Revealed. And this is just to show an example of input that we were able to review in member archives of stuff that was submitted. And this was submitted by the Bristol Literature Committee. And one of the members of that committee was kind enough to share a photo of their group.
So I'm going to tell you a little story about how they decided to get a particular chapter to them. Greg P., who had been in LA, but they then moved to Oregon, and you got to remember, this is an unfunded project. Well, Greg was unavailable and did not have the money to be able to go to Memphis, but he had written an interpretation of the 12 traditions and for the 6th chapter. And they talked about how can we get it there. Greg was going to actually they talked about him driving from wherever he lived in Oregon, down to Portland, put it on a plane, fly it to Memphis, and then them go over there and pick it up. But they decided to do it a little bit different. And we're going to have Motorcycle Ed tell you a little bit about it.
Listen, one of the things that did happen in Memphis was, how long was the conversation phone call?
2 calls totaling over 9 hours.
2 calls totaling over 9 hours, and a little gal sitting there, and they'd take turns typing. You know, one person would hold the phone to their ear, and they would type, and another person would rub their back so they wouldn't cramp up. And, you know, just over and over and over times again of the selflessness. Can you see the arrow there pointing to the briefcase that Molly's sitting on? So, anyway, I once got a chance to talk with Lois, Greg's wife, and I asked Lois if she remembered that telephone conversation. She says, "Oh, yes. Our phone was cut off for about 2 months because of that." So that was back during the day when you had to pay for long distance.
And Bo indicated that if your phone was not cut off at least once during this writing of the basic text, that you really weren't pulling your weight.
Really and truly. Let me introduce you to a man named Jim M. Jim became involved during the Memphis Literature Conference, and despite business commitments, he flew back and forth between Ohio and Memphis several times during February of '81 after the conference was over with to help with the distribution and collection of the Gray Review form. Now, Jim, he hosted, well, actually, Bo says that Jim was relied upon to catch a logical flaw or to carry out an approved plan of action. In Bob Stone's book, A History of NA, he tells the story that Bo had 2 lieutenants, one of them being Joseph P. and the other one being Jim M. So Jim actually hosted the 5th World Lit Conference in Warren, Ohio, and he was really instrumental in emphasizing consistent and fellowship-specific language. You could hear it all in the tapes of him talking about, speak about being clean. You know, and his stories in the basic text, I felt hopeless in the 3rd through the 5th editions. We're going to listen to Jim tell you a little bit about the style sheet.
And this is actual audio from 1981 from the 3rd World Lit Conference.
I'm Jim and Ed.
Hi, Jim.
This is a style sheet. It doesn't mean anything. All it is what we're trying to do is use the same words when meaning the same thing all the way through. There was something that came out in early literature conference work that said, use the word you mean. Yeah. Just for example, I'll go through one example. Use the word or phrase clean in reference to the condition of abstinence from drugs, or instead of clean and sober, clean and serene, straight or sober. Is that understandable?
So in those little work groups, they would take the style sheet, and on the raw input that would come in, if they had any AA jargon in it, they would actually put that, edit it so that this was be what they said, working towards fellowship-specific language.
We'll listen to Joseph P. talk about group conscience.
And at that conference, I think we really started to develop what, in our minds, or what was spiritually attuned to what we thought group conscience was, is writing in committee and writing in groups and letting everybody that wanted to be a part of, and not limiting anyone's participation for any reason.
And we have an opportunity to share what a group conscience experience sounded like or was like. And this is audio from the 3rd World Lit Conference in 1981, where they're discussing whether they should refer to spiritual matters as an appendix, much like they do in the Big Book. And we're going to listen to a member named Gina, and then Bo and Dan.
I'm Gina, and I'm definitely an addict. Okay, the way they handle a lot of this in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is by referring you to the appendix at the end and really expounding on on the spiritual concepts and the fact that it's not not any one particular kind of guy. I think it would really help for us to have a short appendix, a short but very to the point appendix.
Well, I know that there's some people here that are upset about this now, and I want to get a brief statement from everybody about this. And go around to everybody. Well, they may, they may not. Let's hear from them in a very brief form, one in order, just all the way around, and no repeat until we get around, no discussion until we get around. Then we'll have a feel for what the group has to say, and then get into more detailed discussion. No, just a feel for it.
This was a really instructional part of our research in learning about what group conscience is, and hearing that it was asking each person who was in the room or participating in that to share their thoughts and experiences, and to not have other people interrupt them, ask questions of them, but really for everyone to practice listening, and also for the person who gave their input to not jump back in and say one more thing that I wanted to add. So Bo was saying, we're not voting on this, we're going to listen to each person talk for a minute. And you can think of a room with 30 people or however many people are in some of these group conscious meetings. And this practice of listening as a way of getting to a group conscience was very kind of instructional in this clip. So Bo says that this is how we're going to do this. He clarifies that this is not a vote. And we've got this guy, Dan, who's giving his input on this subject.
I'm Dan, I'm an addict. And I sort of in the same position this guy here is. I didn't like people that talked about God when I first read when treatment and got my stuff together a little bit. I like the idea of using higher power, and I like the freedom that gave me, to choose if I wanted to consider the stars and the moon, or if I wanted to just consider the sunlight or whatever. Just a higher power thing, and it is a very important subject to be discussed. I agree. Now, but it doesn't offend me now. God, I believe in God now. I didn't then. So high power is good now, or then, and God is good for right now.
There's a couple things that we hear in these old tapes. We hear chairs kind of squeaking across the floor, and we hear cigarette lighters. And when we see pictures, we see ashtrays, and it made us pose this question: who got into recovery when you could smoke in meetings? We see that Jimmy K has sent a telegram, and the telegram says, "The full fruit of a labor of love lies in the harvest, and that always comes in its right season." And this is a picture of a woman sending a telegram. And Boyd's going to read through progress in Memphis. We like to provide some of these updates because it reflects and shows just how much service work was being put into this project.
So it says here the 1,440 service hours put in by Thursday morning cannot account for the great leap in NA literature taking place in Memphis, Tennessee at the Third World Literature Conference. The fact that our progress seems to reflect three things. First, that a great deal of groundwork was accomplished at the Wichita and Lincoln Literature Conferences, and that it is only now being evidenced. Second, that a great deal of work has been done since the Lincoln Literature Conference by individuals and areas, and their work has been unseen until Memphis. And third, and probably the greatest factor of all, is that a potential for new literature has been built up in the spoken traditions of Narcotics Anonymous over the last 28 years.
At the end of the conference, they had a banquet, and even though they had made some strides with trying to create a language and terminology specific for Narcotics Anonymous, they still concluded the conference with the NA Big Book cake.
I think that cake is just rich.
Yeah. This is Joseph P. was involved after the conference ended with getting the Gray Review form printed. Boyd, you want to talk a little bit about?
This is Joseph P. right here, and Joseph told me that his mom her job was a jobber of actually hiring and putting people together in order to print publications. And so she was the one that was able to steer Joe in the direction of who to hire in order to be able to print basically NA's first rough draft of the basic text, and it's called the Gray Review Form.
Again, there was no funding for this, so they had to raise the money from members to be able to print this. But again, it was a very intentional process of saying, here's the draft. Each page, every line in it is numbered, and we're going to ask for feedback. And each Gray Review Form had this review input form, and you could say, we find the material complete and satisfactory in its present form, or 2, in order that our book to be complete and satisfactory, we recommend the following corrections. And you can put page number, line number, and comments. And so this was a very intentional way of not just saying, hey, this is what we came up with, we're giving it to Narcotics Anonymous. It was, this is what we've come up with, now we need to hear from as many NA members as possible to make sure that this book is complete. And these are pictures of the Gray Review Form being assembled and them being shipped out. And in our research, we came across an air freight slip to Jimmy K with the first Gray Review Form off the printing press. First two.
Yeah.
And this is the shipping slip for the first one. And
in our research, we actually got lucky and were able to come across the person who, I guess the word is stewardship of the book right now, and this is actually what he got. Up there in the top right-hand corner is the Roman numeral 1. And we had read in I think it's the Rainbow Connection, somebody had written a story that said the first 12 off the line actually had Roman numerals in it. And Chris and I got a chance to see Bo's, and his had the Roman numeral 2 in it. But here's a little note that was written by Roger T., who told Jimmy that this was the first one off the printing press right there.
The fourth World Lit Conference was held before the World Service Conference, and it was in Santa Monica. And the theme was, you've seen the book and the time has come, and you had 146 people attend coming from 15 different states. You continue to see support from around the country, and the Monday night Council Bluffs, Iowa group sends a telegram with our prayers and thoughts are with you, hoping for the reality of our big book. So again, that language is still carried over from AA. And the World Service Conference was right after this, and this is the Gray Review Form that was used at the World Service Conference in May of 1981. The Fifth World Literature Conference was held in Warren, Ohio, and hosted by Jim M. It was June 29th to July 5th, with 115 people attending from 18 different states. Sally E., she got clean September 1st, 1969, was on the Board of Trustees and passed away August 2014, three days shy of her 45th anniversary. We have audio of her talking about this, and we're really grateful for it because again, we've got a lot of voices from male members, and this is a voice of a female member talking about her experience.
You know, there's a lot of things that happened with writing that book, and a lot of miracles. And in Ohio, we were divvying up the workload, and there was a guy, and he raised his hand, and he said, I can't read and I can't write, but I can cook. And if each of you will give me $3 a day, I'll fix you some good meals. And he did. That guy was so special. I mean, it was so special that he had the courage to do that. How many of us would have been able to do that? He only had a few months. He didn't have that much time. And by the way, Bob B. tells me he's still clean today.
So we're going to listen, yeah. I know, that deserves a clap, doesn't it? I mean, that's the spirit that Chris and I have discovered in our research all the way through this. Once again, an unfunded project. Memories that need to be preserved. We're going to let Charles tell you a little bit of how they got around.
Me and Tom, we hitchhiked from Santa Monica to Warren, Ohio for the Lit Conference. And I mean, amazingly, it was like one of those God things where you got rides that would take you full states or 2 states over, and you'd be on the road for maybe 10 minutes and somebody else would pick you up. Well, we hitchhiked there, stayed in Warren. Then we went from Warren, we were going to Miami. So we went through Philly, hitchhiking still, down the coast, stop-offs in D.C., Atlanta, and then, you know, made it down to Miami. Nope, don't know anybody. I knew Bob. It's like, Bob, we're coming into town. All right, I got a place for you to stay. Hooked us up at somebody's house, you know, and then I ended up staying. It was like nothing was planned. It's like, well, that's where the World Convention's going to be, and then the Lit Conference is after that. So we're going to be there.
So we have the 6th World Literature Conference held in Miami, and it's actually held in right after the 11th World
Convention.
Thank you. That one, World Convention at the Marco Polo Hotel. And so we have 60 people attended, but members were from 15 states. And what's important about this particular Lit Conference is you had all the folks, the world-level trusted servants come from California, and they came to the World Convention at the Marco Polo. Many of them stayed over to help the final draft there, if you will, of NA's basic text. And so, for lack of a better term, you kind of had the movers and the shakers, really, sitting in on that last particular conference. I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to let a person tell you about another way that he got to Miami, and we're going to call this man Mr. Anonymous, okay?
Yeah, one of the questions you had was about, you know, the trip going down to the Miami Lit Conference from Lincoln. And basically that was, you know, in 81, riding my bicycle from Lincoln down to Miami. I wish I could tell you it was well thought out and planned, but it really wasn't. It was more just like I wanted to get down for the Lit Conference. I wanted to go to the convention as well, but it was more to get to the Lit Conference in Miami, and it was an adventure. I was still a kid, and it was something exciting to do, and at that point I had experienced so much with the different Lit conferences. I knew I was going to be able to find people along the way and find people once I got down there that I'd be able to survive, and I guess I wanted more of that fellowship at that point. It was truly a just for today kind of a process. It was, you know, get on the bike and ride and do 100 miles or so and keep going the next day.
We're not exactly sure how we went. This is what Google Maps would suggest that you do if you're riding a bicycle from Lincoln, Nebraska to Miami, the 1,759 miles. This is where we get the sweat part of the blood, sweat, and tears of this story. Here's Charles recounting the 6th World Lit Conference.
At the 6th Literature Conference, we read each line and voted on every single line. Not whole chapters, not pages or paragraphs, but every line. And as I read each line, I would check yes or no. If it was a no, it went back and got worked on. And that's where the white approval form came from, was that conference there. After every line had been approved, then that was made up and sent out as something that, here's our book. Here's what we're offering to you as a finished product.
So the 7th World Literature Conference was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it was actually held the next year in January of 1982. And this was specifically for the stories portion of Narcotics Anonymous basic text. The members attended from 7 different states, but there were 67 people that attended. And this is the house that they had that conference in. And it boggles my mind to realize that 67 people were there at that place. And here's a picture of the package that went out for the approval form for the stories. And here you see over here the stories. Do you want this one? Yes or no? What's interesting to Chris and I, even at this late date, you've got to think, the last question here is how do you want to deal with references to AA? So
we did a little map reflecting where members were coming from based on which World Literature Conference. So this first World Lit Conference, these states are represented: the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, and then the 6th and the 7th. So this kind of shows where NA members were coming from to participate in these. While there were a lot of people that attended a World Literature Conference, it was really about 85% of those who attended only attended one. So that meant that there were a smaller group of people that served as kind of the glue for the consistency between the conferences. And we see that Bo attended all 7, Hank and Joseph attended 6, Doug, Jim, Linda, Teresa, and Tom attended 5, and so forth. So these were the folks that really were the glue between the conferences. We were very fortunate that NA World Services recently was able to share with us audio of the motion to approve the basic text at the World Service Conference in 1982.
And we have a vote. We have a vote. Let's not confuse it. I'll clarify that. I'm out of order, but I'll clarify that can be decided whether it's white or blue or fat or tall or okay. We're going to have a vote now. All in favor of accepting the basic text approval form as the first edition of our Narcotics Anonymous book, please stand.
And this was originally all that we were able to find in our research was the motion passed, we have a book. The challenge, again, with this being an unfunded project was how to come up with money to actually pay for the printing. So they pre-sold a special first edition NA book at a cost of $25 for each member and used that to get the seed money to be able to print the red first edition and also the blue first edition. Do you want to talk about some of the challenges with getting to printing?
Yeah, unfortunately, Narcotics Anonymous was having a bunch of hiccups during that particular time. Jimmy had given the printer, he had hired the printer who previously had printed NA's pamphlets and also the little white book, and he'd given them $10,000 as a down payment to typeset and print NA's basic text.
We're sorry for the length of the presentation. It's to give you the sense of how long it took to get the basic text actually written.
But anyway, the printer took NA's money, and in the 11th hour, the president of the World Service Office knew this woman by the name of Jeannie, and Jeannie was was her job to put together and print stuff, and she put together a package for the for the World Board of Trustees, and they approved each section of it. Anyway, what we're showing up here is actually the very first edition, the red booklet. This is the special book that people paid $25 for in 1983. $25 in 1983 and 82 is when they started ordering them. It was a pretty hefty sum of money.
And this was used to get the money to be able to print the blue first edition. And as Boyd was talking about, this woman that came in and helped Narcotics Anonymous get the basic text finally printed, we found in our research that there are 2 silver edition first editions of the basic text.
And they're basically, Jeannie had them printed as kind of mementos to Jimmy and thanking him for his work and getting it done. And then she had one printed for herself. And inside here are the inscriptions, as you see. One of them, Jimmy writing to Jeannie, and the other one, Jeannie writing to Jimmy.
There's only 2 silver edition first editions. This is the first basic text off the printing press, and it's dated April 15th, 1983, and Jimmy says this is the first book. It doesn't have a symbol on the cover, and it was done for purposes of determining the weight of the book so he could figure out what shipping costs were going to be. The printer was involved with the Oscars that year and thought that the effort to get this book published was such a worthy cause that he printed a soft cover first edition basic text that has an Oscar on it.
It's the only soft cover in a basic text of the first edition you'll ever see.
Commemorative edition, 1 millionth copy of the basic text came out in 1988. The 20th anniversary commemorative edition came out in 2003, the 25th in 2008, and the 30th anniversary edition came out in 2013.
So in the very first edition, that red book that you guys saw, the last story in that basic text is Tom C's story, Mid-Pacific Serenity, which, man, NA blew it when they changed this. The last line of the basic text read, God is loving us now. Isn't that cool? It really is.
So the impact of the book, it unified the message and language of Narcotics Anonymous. Bob Stone, in his book, My Years with NA, says NA would not have had the financial resources to meet the challenges that growth in the 80s afforded. And to give context, this is a timeline showing a chart of worldwide Narcotics Anonymous meetings. So we had 1 meeting in 53, 2 meetings by 61. When Bo made the decision to go to San Francisco for the 7th World Convention, when he showed that initiative, there were 764 meetings worldwide, 1977. When the basic text was published in 1983, there were over 3,300 meetings worldwide. And at the 2018 World Service Conference, it was reported that there were over 70,000 meetings worldwide. So it took 30 years to go from 1 meeting to 3,300 meetings, right? And in the 30 plus years following that, the growth has been phenomenal. The book, Bob says, without the basic text, the message of NA would have become fragmented, and the fellowship could have been eclipsed by other recovery movements. Lastly, as of this past spring, the book, his basic text, has been translated into 31 other languages, making the message of Narcotics Anonymous available to so many other people. And it's just very powerful to see the Narcotics Anonymous message being available in so many different languages to so many different addicts seeking recovery. And that Rainbow Connection piece that was read, where it says, that the basic text will be available for addicts around the world. You know, at that time, I wonder what they would think, seeing just how far that message has reached.
Narcóticos Anônimos. Se você quer o que nós temos a oferecer e está disposto a fazer esforço para obtê-lo, então está preparado para dar certos passos. Estes são os princípios che possibilitarono nossa recuperação.
Abbiamo ammesso di essere impotenti sulla nostra dipendenza e che la nostra vita era divenuta ingovernabile.
เราเริ่มเชื่อว่ามีบางสิ่งที่มีพลังมากกว่าตัวเราซึ่งสามารถช่วยให้เรากลับไปมีสติได้
Πήραμε την απόφαση να παραδώσουμε τη θέλησή μας και τη ζωή μας στη φροντίδα του Θεού της κατανόησής μας.
4. Sin miedo hicimos un detallado inventario moral de nosotros mismos.
Trin 5. Vi indrømmede for Gud, os selv og et andet menneske vores fejl sande natur.
Ние бяхме напълно готови Бог да отстрани всички тези дефекти от характера ни.
Stap 7. Ons het om nederig gevra om ons tekortkominge te verwyder.
Kita membuat daftar orang-orang yang telah kita sakiti dan menyiapkan diri untuk memperbaikinya kepada mereka semua. 我们在可能的状况下去弥补这些人，除非如此，做会造成他们或别人的伤害。
המשכנו בחשבון נפש אישי, וכאשר שגינו, הודינו בכך מיד.
سعيا من خلال الدعاء والتأمل إلى تحسين صلتنا الواعية بالله على قدر فهمنا داعين فقط أن يمنحنا المعرفة لمشيئته لنا والقوة على تنفيذها.
با بیداری روحانی حاصل از برداشتن این قدم‌ها ما کوشیدیم این پیام را به معتادان برسانیم و این اصول را در تمام امور زندگی خود به اجرا درآوریم.
Det här låter som ett jättearbete och vi kan inte göra alltihop på en gång. Vi blir inte beroende på en dag. Så kom ihåg, ta det lugnt.
On yksi asia, joka enemmän kuin mikään muu voi tehdä tyhjäksi toipumisemme. Välinpitämätön tai suvaitsematon asenne hengellisiin periaatteisiin. Tarvitsemme välttämättä niistä 3. Rehellisyyttä, ennakkoluulottomuutta ja halukkuutta. Niiden avulla pääsemme jo hyvän matkaa eteenpäin.
Wij zijn van mening dat onze benadering van de ziekte verslaving volkomen realistisch is, aangezien de therapeutische waarde van een verslaafde die een andere helpt zonder weerga is. Wij menen dat onze manier praktisch is, want de ene verslaafde kan het best de andere verslaafde begrijpen en helpen. Wij geloven dat hoe eerder wij onze problemen in het dagelijks leven onder ogen zien, hoe sneller wij aanvaardbare, verantwoordelijke en productieve leden van onze maatschappij zullen worden.
Az egyetlen módja, hogy távol maradjunk az aktív függőségtől az, hogy nem használjuk azt az első adagot. Ha olyan vagy, mint mi, akkor tudod, hogy egy is sok, és 1000 sosem elég. Ezt nagyon hangsúlyozzuk, mert tudjuk, hogy ha bármilyen drogot használunk, vagy egyiket a másikkal helyettesítjük, akkor újra felébresztjük függőségünket.
Požiūris į alkoholį kaip medžiagą kitokią nei narkotikai daugelį priklausomųjų atvedė prie atkryčio. Prieš tai, kai mes atėjome į aną, daugelis iš mūsų alkoholį atskirdavo nuo narkotikų, bet mes nebegalime savo leisti klysti šiuo klausimu. Alkoholis yra narkotikas. Mes esame žmonės sergantis priklausomybės liga, todėl norėdami sveikti privalome susilaikyti nuo bet kokių narkotikų.
私たちが手にできたものを維持していくためには用心を怠ってはならない。一人一人の自由が12のステップによってもたらされているように、12の伝統はグループに自由をもたらす。私たちを結びつけようとする絆がバラバラに引き裂こうとする力よりも強硬なものである限り、心配はいらない。
Notre bien commun devrait passer en premier. Le rétablissement personnel dépend de l'unité de Narcotics Anonymes. Für den Sinn und Zweck unserer Gemeinschaft gibt es nur eine höchste Autorität, einen liebenden Gott, wie er sich in unserem Gruppengewissen zu erkennen gibt. Unsere Vertrauensleute sind nur betraute Dienerinnen und Diener, sie herrschen nicht.
Единственным условием для членства в анонимных наркоманах является желание прекратить употребление. Anonimne narkomany.
Każda grupa powinna być niezależna we wszystkich sprawach, z wyjątkiem tych, które dotyczą innych grup lub na jako całości.
Katrai grupai ir tikai viens galvenais mērķis – nest vēsti par atveseļošanos atkarīgajam, kurš joprojām cieš.
Bir Narcotics Anonymous grubu herhangi bir ilgili kuruma veya dışında kalan girişime Narcotics Anonymous adına asla onay veya bu adı ödünç vermemeli. Bu ad ile maddi destekte bulunmamalıdır ki para, mülk ve prestij sorunları bizi öncelikli amacımızdan saptırmasın.
Tradisi 7. Setiap kumpulan NA seharusnya mampu menampung diri sepenuhnya tanpa menerima apa-apa sumbangan dari luar.
Anonimni narkomani bi trebali zauvek ostati neprofesionalni, iako naši uslužni centri mogu zapošljavati plaćene djelatnike.
परंपरा 9 एनए जैसे है कभी संगठित नहीं होना चाहिए, लेकिन हम सेवा परिषद या समितियां निर्माण कर सकते हैं जो सीधे उनके प्रति उत्तरदायी होंगे जिनकी वो सेवा करते हैं.
10. erfðavenjan. Narcotics Anonymous hefur enga skoðun á utanaðkomandi málefnum. Þess vegna ætti aldrei að draga nafn NA-samtakana inn í almenn ágreiningsmál.
Tradisjon 10. Anonyme narkomane har ingen mening om utenforliggende spørsmål. Derfor bør NA-navnet aldri trekkes inn i offentlig strid.
Olá, o meu nome é Joaquim e sou um adito. 12ª tradição. O anonimato é o alicerce espiritual de todas as nossas tradições, lembrando-nos sempre a necessidade de colocar os princípios acima das personalidades. Obrigado, mais 24.
But we thank you guys a lot, really do. Y'all are the best, and we really appreciate it. So, yeah, thanks.